This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 170 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, I'm going to share my suggestions for post-pandemic teaching. I'm calling this episode No More Easy Button. I am nervous about recording this episode because I don't want my metaphor of the easy button to be misinterpreted. I'm going to be talking about where I think we should be headed in schools with the lessons we've learned from teaching through the COVID-19 pandemic. And I want to make sure that one thing is completely clear. Nothing has been easy about this last year, especially not for teachers. I repeat several times throughout this piece that I do not think teachers need to be working harder. What I do think is that we need to approach things differently. I say it all with more polish later on, so I won't go into detail now. I just figured I would come right out of the gate with this disclaimer because I don't want a single teacher to come away with that message. You have worked your asses off this year and have gotten very little in return. And I think if some of the changes I propose here had been put in place years ago, it's possible this year wouldn't have been quite so hard. Okay, before I start, I would like to thank Studio for sponsoring this episode. Today by Studio is a free add-on to Google Classroom, which allows students to track and plan all of their classwork with tools that allow students to estimate how much time a task will take and divide larger tasks into smaller ones. Teachers can also track how each student is handling their workload over time. This is a valuable tool to share with parents during parent-teacher meetings to help each student plan their work and pace themselves for longer-term projects. Coaching students on being better organized has a direct impact on their grades as well as their long-term success, and together we can make a difference. Today is free for individual teachers. School and district plans come with added features like timetable import, student-entered tasks, and LMS integrations. Visit studio.co/pedagogy to create your free account now and get your students planning. That's Studio, studio.co/pedagogy. Support also comes from Parley. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to have a class discussion where everyone, even the quietest students, participated? Well, it's possible with Parley. Parley helps teachers facilitate student-centered, inclusive, and data-driven class discussions. Through written discussion activities called online roundtables and verbal discussion activities called live roundtables, Parley helps students develop true agency as they learn to introduce their own unique ideas, ask questions, and build on or challenge the ideas of others. There's also a library with thousands of ready-made discussion prompts for every subject. The best part? Parley's suite of instructional tools transition seamlessly between in-person, online, and hybrid learning environments. Try Parley for free today at parleyideas.com. That's parleyideas.com, and learn why thousands of teachers all over the world are raving about this amazing new tool. One last thing. If you consume my content exclusively through podcasts, you may not realize that every single one of these episodes has an accompanying blog post over on my website, Cult of Pedagogy. These posts are more than just show notes. They fully summarize the concepts in the podcast, often along with pictures, charts, and links to resources that we talk about here. All you have to do to find these posts is go to cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast along the top, and look for the episode you're listening to. Everything will be there. All right, here we go with No More Easy Button. When I buy fruit at the grocery store, I tend to avoid kiwis most of the time, even though I love them. I avoid them because they're hard to prepare. Unlike an apple, which you just wash and bite into, or a banana, which is pretty easy to peel, a kiwi takes work. And even after many years of peeling and cutting kiwis, I'm still not entirely sure I'm doing it right. And yet, if I really think about it, cutting and slicing a kiwi is nothing compared to, say, preparing a watermelon or a pineapple for eating. That is work. Still, a kiwi's hard enough to make me pass it by most times I shop. But at least I'm still in the produce section, buying fresh ingredients that I'm planning to cook into healthy meals. That's a lot harder than going to the frozen food aisles and buying pre-made meals that only require heating up. And while doing that is less healthy, in the frozen food section, at least I have a chance of finding healthier food than if I go to a drive-thru and get a burger and fries. The thing about the burger and fries is that it's so easy and so fast. Where I live, I can fill up on hot, delicious food in a matter of minutes just by getting in my car and driving to one of like 30 different fast food places in my town. And for a few minutes while I take my first bites, I will feel awesome about that meal because I'm getting fed and it tastes so good and wow, it was just so easy. But that feeling won't last. Soon I'll start to feel sluggish and I'll start thinking about how bad for me that food was, and I'll tell myself it's going to be a while before I can do that again, because if I did it for the next meal and the next and the next, I would quickly become a very unhealthy human. Those food choices range from difficult to easy, with things like kiwis and pineapples on the difficult end and fast food on the easy end. I think it's safe to assume we have all made choices that are all along that continuum, and that your rationale for your choices is similar to mine. The difficult is usually more rewarding long term, so when you're well rested and on top of your game, you're able to make more of those difficult choices. But when life gets challenging in other areas, you might lean more toward the easier ones, despite knowing they're not good for you. As humans, we are wired to go for the easy button, and we have so many of them nowadays. Here are some of mine. I have heard bad things about how Amazon treats their workers, but I still order from them at least once a week. I have a lot of books I'd like to read, but instead I watch Netflix. I have reusable shopping bags, but sometimes I don't feel like dealing with them and I just use plastic. The struggle between what's good for us and what's convenient, I believe, is part of the human condition. And we do it in education as well. Here is just one simple common example. If we really wanted to find out what a student knew about a topic, having them answer open-ended questions would give us a pretty accurate picture of that knowledge. But essay questions or even short answer questions are a lot harder to grade than multiple choice questions, which only ask students to choose correct answers. There's a chance they might not actually know the material, but just guess the right answer. Still, because multiple choice tests are so efficient, and because we have so many students, we might lean in this direction more often. Let me repeat that last part. Because we have so many students. Because that's really the root of it. And I want to be very clear about this. Most of the time when we hit that easy button, it's because we have to. Most schools and districts have been set up in ways that make us feel like we have no choice. Large class sizes, a focus on standardized tests, and a lack of funding means we're always being asked to do more with less. The conditions under which most teachers teach are not anywhere near ideal for good quality teaching. So the easy button becomes more like a panic button. And we hit it not because we're lazy, but because we have to survive. We hit the easy button and hit it again, cutting corners, making choices that we know aren't really best for kids, but that we hope are good enough. And we've been doing this for generations, moving kids through the system with what looked like a passable education and sending enough of them out into the world as more or less functional adults, so we were able to tell ourselves that things were working well enough. And then the pandemic hit. And we tried to keep doing what we've been doing, but remotely. And kids started to fail. Students who used to get straight A's stopped turning work in. When class sessions were scheduled over Zoom or Google Meet, less than half the class would show up, even if the meetings were called mandatory. Many people blamed COVID. They said remote learning doesn't work. And I agreed with them, sort of. But what I also believed and still do is that the pandemic didn't create problems. It just revealed them. The kind of teaching that was happening in a lot of schools was only working because the kids were physically in front of us. So most of the kids, most of the time, did what we told them to do. It was a tacit agreement made between educators and families all over the world. You send us your kids, they sit in our schools for 7 hours a day and do what we tell them to do, and we will give them good enough grades to pass. There was no guarantee under this system that they were actually learning. And there was also definitely no guarantee that they would ever be excited about it. And now we're starting to get to a place where restrictions will be lifted, where we can all get back into the buildings together face to face, eventually without social distancing or masks. And so theoretically, many of the students whose grades dropped so dramatically during the pandemic should start to improve again. But will it be because they're really learning? Will it be because they're excited about what they're doing? Or will it simply be a matter of compliance, of humans generally being cooperative and doing what they're told? I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. In many classrooms, the transition may start off energized, where we get kids excited to learn again and plan experiences that take full advantage of the fact that we're together in person again. But if we're not careful, if we don't go into it with a different mindset, we could easily slip back into our old ways where we do what's easy, what's most efficient, and not what's really going to contribute to a high-quality education. I would like to propose that we enter this new phase of teaching, this new period in history, with a new mantra: no more easy button. Let's start to look at every decision we make about the way we do school with a more critical lens. And every time before we move forward, let's be asking ourselves, is this the best move, or are we just hitting the easy button? Before I start talking about what I think it could look like, I want to emphasize that I am not talking about more. I'm talking about different. Not adding more to our plates, but taking some things off, rearranging stuff, changing the way we approach teaching, not adding more to what we're already doing. You have all done more than enough, especially over the last year. So this message is not just meant for teachers. You can do some of this on your own, but if the people who are running your school, the parents in your community, the district office, and your state government aren't on board, or if any or all of these parties have expectations that put you into that easy button mode, where you're just trying to do more and more, you're only going to get so far. The shifts I'm proposing are for everyone. So if we adopt this new mantra, if we consistently try to move away from the easy button, what will it look like in our teaching practice? Let's explore 4 areas: lesson design, assessment, inclusivity, and relationships. We'll start with lesson design. The first shift I think we would need is less fluff. In many classrooms, we gave assignments that made it look and feel like students were interacting with and processing our content, but that were actually just keeping them busy. What this meant was that students had a lot of work to do and we had a lot of grades to record, but real learning wasn't necessarily happening. It's this shift, this removal of fluff, reducing our overall quantity of work to only the stuff that's more densely packed with learning, that will give us room for all the rest of the changes I'll be suggesting today. The second shift in lesson design is more active learning. Planning more hands-on experiences, more project-based and community-based learning, more movement-based learning, more field studies that let students use their surroundings as part of the curriculum. I think being forced to teach through our computers has given so many teachers a renewed appreciation for the things we can only do in person. And if we cut some of the fluff, we will have more time for things like this. The third shift in lesson design is more collaboration. We can start giving students more meaningful work to do together. Managing collaborative work is definitely not easy. It creates more chaos in the classroom. You lose a lot of control as a teacher. and there's always a chance that students aren't actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. Doing it well is even more challenging, at least at first, because students need training and practice and collaborative skills to make the most of this time. But if you put that time in at the beginning, it really pays off in the end. The fourth shift is more pre-recorded content. Now that most teachers have been forced to shift their instruction to digital delivery systems like screencast videos, they have seen the benefits of offering direct instruction, in other words, lectures, through video, which allows students to access that content whenever they need it or as often as they need it. And it frees up class time for more interactive stuff. Although doing this takes more work ahead of time, it's work that is worth doing when you can. When we had unlimited face-to-face time with our students, some of us allowed far too much of that time to be consumed by passive learning. Now that we have a renewed appreciation for the value of that face-to-face time, we can use it more deliberately, shifting instruction to digital formats when possible so that we can make the most of our time in person. So that's lesson design. Less fluff, more active learning, more collaboration, and making better use of pre-recorded content. The second area is assessment. The first shift in assessment that I think we should make is more feedback and fewer grades. A letter grade will never help a student grow the way that specific timely feedback will. But grades are so much quicker to give, so we fall back on them. We might also give a lot of grades because our schools or districts require a certain number of points or letter grades to be posted on a regular basis. If we want higher quality learning to happen in our schools, we need to move away from grades and toward feedback as much as we can. If we've gotten rid of the fluffy busy work assignments and are doing fewer, more robust, collaborative, project-based tasks, this shift away from grades should happen naturally, because these assignments lend themselves better to conferencing and rubrics rather than one-off grades. The second shift in assessment is more iteration. Speaking of one-off grades, let's cut way back on those too. If a student needs improvement in some area, isn't it better to give them multiple opportunities to improve rather than stamping them with a single grade and moving on? If we can make room in our plans to allow students to redo assignments, we're likely to see more growth. A system like the Mastery-Based Classroom that I featured in episode 165 would be a great way to do this. The third shift in assessment is more fluid or incremental deadlines. This past year, many teachers have had a little choice but to give lots of grace on deadlines. For the first time, everyone was facing unprecedented conditions that messed with our concentration, threatened our social emotional well-being, and put us in a steady state of low-level anxiety. This made it easier for everyone to give everyone a break. But pre-COVID, we know that many of our students were dealing with other factors that also made it difficult to keep academics at the top of their priority list. And those things aren't going to magically go away. We can carry the grace we gave each other during the pandemic into the next phase, setting up assignments so that they have more fluid deadlines, or if the assignments are larger, incremental check-ins so that we know students are making progress and can provide feedback and troubleshooting to keep them going. The last shift in assessment is more open resource tests. We used to refer to these as open book tests. The name change is meant to reflect the variety of non-print resources that we now have available to us. Having school go remote last year, students were suddenly able to cheat like never before. Again, because we weren't there to watch them. But why wouldn't they? We have known forever that information is readily available online. Memorization is becoming much less desirable. What we should be asking from our students is doing something with that information, like developing and defending an opinion about it, or some other higher order task that requires a level of originality that can't simply be Googled. If designed well, our assessments could be open book, open note, open resource, and still be an excellent measure of what our students have learned. So again, the shifts in assessment are more feedback and fewer grades, more iteration, more fluid or incremental deadlines, and more open resource tests. The next area is inclusivity. The first shift I think we need to be making is more universally designed learning experiences. And this is something that we just talked about in episode 166. So if you're not familiar with that, that would be the next episode to listen to. One very typical way to give an assignment is to have students read something, then do something in writing to demonstrate their learning. This type of task favors a certain type of learner, but we can now offer many other options to students so they can choose the pathway that works best for them, like letting them learn the content through video or audio, preferably with some sort of captioning or transcript to accompany them, and demonstrate their learning by recording a response in audio or video form. Providing all of these options takes extra time and extra work at the beginning, but if we're giving fewer assignments overall, treating more work as formative instead of having to assign a grade for everything, and working together with our colleagues to share the workload, we'll be creating learning experiences that reach far more of our students. The next shift in inclusivity is more introvert-friendly options for participation. Oftentimes we can have what we think is an excellent class discussion that feels vibrant and energetic, but if we were to watch a playback of it, we would see that in fact only a handful of extroverted students were actually carrying the conversation. Teaching remotely has shown us that when we put students into an environment where participation no longer requires speaking up spontaneously in front of a group, we get more participation from introverted students and those who simply process their thoughts more slowly. As we transition to teaching in person, we can be thoughtful about finding ways to allow these students to keep contributing in ways that are more comfortable for them. The third shift is more remote and hybrid pathways. Even if we're fully in person, we can continue to offer options for at-home learning for families who need them, circumstances that demand them, and students who happen to learn better under those conditions. The fourth shift is better representation in classroom materials. We can make sure the books and other materials students learn from reflect our students, their families, and the diversity of our world. Websites like We Need Diverse Books and Diverse Book Finder are good places to start working toward this. So again, the shifts in inclusivity are more universally designed learning experiences, more introvert-friendly options for participation, more remote and hybrid pathways, and better representation in classroom materials. The last area is relationships. And the first shift I think we need to be making is regular, dedicated time for relationship building. It seems that everyone in education is quick to agree that relationships are important, but if we're not scheduling in time to build them, those relationships will be flimsy at best, and they'll be uneven. We will get to know the students who demand the most attention and let the others slip through the cracks. It was really hard to do through a video screen. As we regain the privilege of being in the same room together, let's not waste it. In 2016, I wrote a post called A 4-Part System for Getting to Know Your Students that sets up kind of a system for making sure that you are getting to know students at the beginning of the school year and continuing to get to know them throughout the school year. And I linked to that in the blog post. It looks like I never made a podcast episode about it, so I might do that someday. But the point is, it really does need to be some sort of a system, because otherwise academics take over and housekeeping takes over, and the relationship, it really just goes down the list in priority. And so if we are going to have relationships with our students and make them strong, then we're going to have to make sure that we are scheduling in time to continue that relationship building. The second shift in relationships is more restorative practices. Although it is quicker to suspend a student for misbehavior, exclusionary discipline practices and zero tolerance policies don't solve the root problems or prevent repeat behaviors. In fact, they often make things worse. By contrast, restorative practices are more time-consuming and require more thought and emotional labor, but if they're done the right way, they get much better results. And I've got 2 really good episodes on restorative practice. Episode 89 is a really good overview of what restorative practices are. And then episode 134 is where we drill down to just one specific technique of restorative practices called repairing harm. So if you are new to restorative practices, you can get a taste of it by listening to those 2 episodes. The third shift I think we need to make with relationship building is doing more anti-bias work on ourselves. The starting point for improving relationships with all students and creating an environment in our schools that feels safe and welcoming to everyone is to study our own biases. Plenty of books and other resources are out there for doing this work, but one that has been very successful is called Courageous Conversations About Race. And I interviewed Glenn Singleton and David Watkins, who run that training, because there's a book and a training, in episode 120 where they talk about what they do in that training. And the title of the post is How One District Learned to Talk About Race. The last shift in relationships is more fun. It has been a ridiculously hard year, and being physically separated has made a lot of people value face-to-face time in a way they never had before. So now that in-person time is becoming more possible, let's make the most of it. And that doesn't mean cramming every minute with productivity. It means making time for joy every day. In January of this year, I asked teachers on Twitter to tell me how their instruction would be different once pandemic restrictions were lifted. And I provide a link to that in the blog post for this episode. I got over 280 replies, I think. Many of those replies contributed to the content of this article, but my favorite one of all came from a teacher named Travis Welch, who simply said, "We are going to laugh a lot." So the shifts again in relationships, regular dedicated time for relationship building, more restorative practices, more anti-bias work on ourselves, and more fun. We are heading into a time when we'll be able to gather together again, work closely, see each other's faces, and get back to normal. But normal didn't work for a lot of kids. It also didn't work for a lot of teachers. Too many systems and structures were set up for automation to make things as efficient and convenient as possible for the people in charge. What I have shared with you here are just a few ways we can change things, but there are so many other possibilities. We're at the start of a new era, literally, and we are wiser now. Our eyes are even more open to differences in student needs, to inequities in our system, and to how important our connection is. So let's not go back to the way things used to be. With this fresh start, let's take that wisdom and use it. As you plan for the upcoming year, keep looking for ways to lean away from the easy button, to do the slower, more nuanced, more satisfying work of prioritizing quality over quantity and creating schools where each student and each teacher has what they need to thrive. To read a written version of this podcast, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 170. To get a weekly email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, courses, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.